Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, will the Phala Phala matter be back in Parliament? And what will that mean for President Cyril Ramaphosa if that's the case? That's the question tonight after the Constitutional Court reserved judgment in the Phala Phala matter following a day of blistering arguments, with the EFF and ATM arguing that Parliament failed to hold the President accountable and subverted parliamentary rules by dismissing the independent report into the matter. The ATM is the party that originally tabled the impeachment motion against the President. Its President, Vuyo Zungula, will join us tonight. Also on the show, are community leaders in Stilfontein in the Northwest aiding and abating illegal miners? They've been defending the miners underground and pushing for food supplies to be sent down. But what are they doing to assist the police to get the miners to retreat and come out? One of the community leaders in Stilfontein, Thembile Botman, will speak to us tonight. And then later, Dr. John Hlophe has transitioned from the judiciary to politics, and he's written a book detailing his experience in the judiciary. He's going to join us tonight to have the conversation about that. But first, my comment. So, the Phala Phala matter is back in the spotlight. The EFF led a protest today against how Parliament dealt with the Phala Phala scandal. They marched as the Constitutional Court set this morning to hear arguments from the EFF, which seeks to declare the decision taken by the National Assembly not to adopt the independent panel's report on Phala Phala and not refer it to the impeachment committee as irrational, unlawful and unconstitutional. The parties argue that Parliament failed to hold the President accountable and they subverted parliamentary rules by dismissing the report. So they're saying basically the ANC abused its majority to shield the President. Remember that independent panel report found that there was prima facie evidence that the President breached his oath of office and anti-corruption laws. Here's the EFF lawyer earlier today stating what their case is all about.
There is binding authority which tells you that prima facie evidence exists on a spectrum, and that the objective to find prima facie evidence for the purpose of a motion is not to subject the initial sifting mechanism done by the panel to the same threshold as actual guilt. It's something lower than that. And to the extent that the panel engaged with sufficient information and prima facie evidence, the panel discharged its responsibility accordingly. And that's why that reason, insofar as that is the principal reason in front of you is concerned, that's no reason at all. There are some reasons which have been introduced, particularly by the President and the ANC in this matter, where they've talked about various things being which I am loosely going to say they characterize as the report being fundamentally flawed. They actually use that phrase in their pleadings and in their heads of argument at various points. And the argument, as we understand it, seems to be that never mind the sufficient information versus prima facie evidence issue, which I've already addressed in passing, is that this report was so fundamentally flawed that it had to be voted down because of how nonsensical or misconstrued or misapplied it was. And what we say is that it's trite that those reasons which find their way before this court, not in Mr. Lamola's words when given in the House, but under Mr. Figile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the ANC's answering affidavit filed in this court, that that's an ex post facto justification, and that's too little, too late.
So that was the submission by the EFF's lawyer. Let's hear from the President Cyril Ramaphosa's lawyer and how they argued their case earlier today.
There has been no attempt to explain the delay, and there has been no attempt to produce facts which show why the delay should be overlooked. Then on exclusive jurisdiction, the core complaint of the EFF is that the decision of the Assembly was irrational. Rationality is an obligation which rests on all who exercise public power. It's not an obligation which is specific to the National Assembly. The analogy is this: if the President takes administrative action and he breaches praja, that doesn't bring the matter within the exclusive jurisdiction of the court, because the obligation to take lawful administrative action rests on all administrators. It's not an obligation that is specific to the President. Similarly, a challenge based on alleged irrationality doesn't trigger the exclusive jurisdiction of this court. The EFF does attempt to show that the application rests on a failure of the NA to hold the executive accountable, and that is a specific obligation of the National Assembly. But we say that the National Assembly has held the President to account. Firstly, the Speaker considered the motion, found it compliant with the rule, and referred it to an independent panel. The Assembly, through the Speaker, established an independent panel to investigate the matter. The panel conducted an investigation. The President was required to explain and justify his conduct in what became a public forum, effectively. The panel recommended that a Section 89(1) impeachment inquiry be proceeded with, and the National Assembly considered the recommendation and didn't accept it. So the procedures to give effect to Section 89 of the Constitution were operationalized, and the President was called to account.
Now, the court also asked the lawyers some tough questions, including why the panel used prima facie evidence and sufficient evidence simultaneously.
This is what they say. Viewed as a whole, the information presented to the panel, it's not them, prima facie establishes that there was a deliberate intention. So the word prima facie has been used throughout by the panel.
It has. But the earlier portion that I read to Justice Hlophe is an earlier paragraph where they're explaining what they understand by that.
Now let's look at that,
yes.
You and I as lawyers. If the panel uses the word prima facie and sufficient evidence interchangeably, as if these were synonyms, that is wrong. Forget about what Makwakwa said. My brother Majid has taken you through what Makwakwa said.
Yes.
That is wrong. And if a wrong test has been applied, it invariably would lead to a wrong conclusion.
Yes.
So isn't the case here that the report has to be impugned because it is based on a wrong test? The panel conflated the two tests as if it's one and the same thing. Yeah. You and I know that it is not. We have to search through the report to find the word sufficient evidence to save it. This is a report by 3 eminent lawyers. Do you have an answer to that?
I'm not going to repeat my submissions that you've heard already on the issue of the threshold. But I think in the way you've constructed it to me, I accept what you say, Justice Matopo.
So yeah, it was a tough day for lawyers in the Constitutional Court today. But another justice actually pointed out that the panel was constrained, that independent panel that investigated this matter, because the rules say that the panel must conclude that there's sufficient evidence to show that the president committed a serious misconduct or a serious violation of law. But then it restricts the panel considerably because the panel will receive only information from members, may not conduct even any oral hearings. So it's limited to the written record of information before it. So how do they actually come out with sufficient evidence? However, on the other hand, why block an impeachment inquiry against the president because of alleged deficiencies in the report? Why wasn't the report then referred back to the panel to address those deficiencies? Isn't that contrary to the notion of holding the president accountable? That's another question that was asked earlier today. But it's really been fascinating arguments coming out of the Constitutional Court earlier today. The question we're asking you tonight, though, is, having heard the legal arguments in court today, do you think this matter must go back to Parliament, or do you think the ship has sailed? Some people have argued that let the matter go because President Cyril Ramaphosa has been exonerated by a few other institutions, including the Public Protector, the Reserve Bank, and the NPA. Remember, the NPA said, we're not going to prosecute anyone on this matter. But the EFF and ATM hope that the Constitutional Court will hear and be persuaded by their arguments. The EFF is asking the court not only to set aside the National Assembly vote, but to substitute it with a decision to initiate an impeachment inquiry. What are your thoughts? Let us know on WhatsApp. You can send us that WhatsApp on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and say name and where you're sending that voice note from. Please keep them at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. All right, let's jump straight into the conversation with the African Transformation Movement, which argued in court that it was irrational for the ANC to rely on the completion of the investigation that looked into the conduct of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Advocate Anton Katz for the ATM submitted to the court that it was irrational for the ANC to vote against adopting the Section 89 independent report on Phala Phala on that basis. Now, the president of ATM is Vuyo Zungula, who joins us now in studio. And of course, the ATM having been the party that initially launched this impeachment motion against the president in Parliament. Vuyo, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening.
Evening, and evening to everyone watching.
So the issue that was raised in the Constitutional Court today was around how the National Assembly conducted the vote on this independent report. There was a mention earlier today that the pressure was put on ANC MPs to vote in a particular way. Is there evidence to that regard?
Before we go to the ANC part, let's look at what is the role of Parliament. The role of Parliament is guided by Section 42 and Section 55 of the Constitution when it comes to holding the executive accountable. This report, we do not have a case whereby the retired Constitutional Court judge out of nowhere decided to just wake up, write a report. It was because there was a motion which met the threshold in accordance to the rules, and he was acting on the instruction of Parliament. Now he comes with his with the independent panel, with working in line with the rules. He comes with a recommendation to say there is a case that the president must answer. Now, our view as the ATM is to say, if the report that he came up with was to say there's no case to answer, it would have been irrational for Parliament to say, let us institute an inquiry, because the report that is drafted by legal experts is not suggesting that. But a case whereby legal experts are suggesting that there's a case to answer, it is rational for Parliament not to hold an inquiry. And I think what Anton Katz actually pushed today was to stipulate that Parliament that day was not impeaching the president. It was voting whether to establish a committee that will have that will basically hold a trial where there can be oral evidence. They could consider bringing even that Hazim guy and everyone. But in the face of it, it was irrational then for Parliament to say there must be no scrutiny, because Section 42(3) of the Constitution mandates, obligates Parliament to scrutinize the actions of the president. As we sit here now, no one can confidently say Parliament has fulfilled that section of the Constitution. In fact, the only thing we've got a Parliament that has violated Section 42 of the Constitution by not scrutinizing the actions of the president. We can't have a Parliament that is going to say the Hawks, the NPAs, and the other institutions, because the president is not elected by those institutions. He's not accountable to those institutions. There's only one institution whereby the president accounts to. It is only Parliament.
Yeah, and Parliament will argue that, well, we are very much entitled to act in the manner that we acted. This was a constitutional process, whether the ANC abuses its majority or not. That's still part of our parliamentary democracy. So what do you say to that? Because whether you like it or not, if it goes back to Parliament, who says the GNU members of Parliament are not going to abuse their majority and still choose not to vote in favor of the report?
We have a constitutional democracy in our country. And all actions, either of the executive or Parliament, must be consistent with the Constitution. So that is the bone of contention here, to say, when Parliament conducts its business, is it consistent with what is obligated or mandated by the Constitution? In a case whereby Parliament rightfully takes a decision that is not in violation of the Constitution, because we differ politically in terms of our views, we can't go to the courts. But in a case whereby Parliament takes a decision, in our view, that is a violation of the Constitution, then the Constitutional Court, because we live in a constitutional democracy, is the one that needs to adjudicate. Because we can't have a Parliament that is going to undermine the Constitution. The Parliament has to operate within the framework of adhering to the prescripts of the Constitution.
Yes, and you're right about constitutional democracy. But the point I'm trying to make is there are parliamentary processes. So not all the parties are going to be happy with how Parliament votes. For instance, if there's anything that is taken to Parliament today and the GNU ministers, all the parties in the GNU decide we're going to vote together to pass this motion, they can do so. They can exercise that obligation. But I suppose on the other hand, you may argue that there have been instances where Parliament has taken decisions and the ConCourt said you failed to hold the executive accountable. What are you seeking this time around? What are you and the EFF hoping the Constitutional Court can rule on, and how does the matter be ventilated then in Parliament if they rule in your favor?
We want the Constitutional Court to actually affirm that Parliament must always act in the best interest of the country and must take resolutions that are consistent with the Constitution. Regardless whether it's a GNU, it is an ANC majority, whatever resolutions that are taken by Parliament, they must be rational. Now, there needs to be a test. That is why in this case we're saying that on the face of it, if you have a report that is saying there's a case to answer, you can't have MPs that are seeking to review a report, because the arguments on the day by Minister Lamola was basically saying they are basically reviewing the report. Our argument is to say the report is written by a reputable Chief Justice, legal experts. Mr. Ramaphosa was correct when he had some issues with the report. He did not say Parliament has got the mandate and the authority to review that report. He went to the Constitutional Court because he knows it is only a court of law that can set aside that report. As it stands now, that report still stands. It has never been set aside by any court of law. So what the ANC is trying now to confuse people is to act as if the decision by the National Assembly back then was basically a reviewal of the report. In our view, we are arguing that MPs, sometimes they do not even have metric, they do not have the capacity and the legal grounding to actually overturn a report that has been drafted by legal experts.
Yes, and why bring in legal experts to come and advise you on a matter if you're ultimately not going to take that counsel? Do you have issues? Because earlier today, I think there was an issue raised about ANC MPs and how they behaved. Do you have issues with the pressure, and I say that in inverted commas, that was placed on ANC MPs to vote in a particular manner against this report?
Look, there's a judgment on the UTM issue whereby the question was, when confronted where there's a conflict between party interest as well as the country's interest, what must an MP do? The Constitutional Court affirmed that the MPs must always act or vote in line with their conscience and in line with their oath of office. Now, on the day, you remember Minister Mantashe, there was those allegations that they were threatening members of the ANC. Even on the day, there was an MP, Thandima Mbehlala, who, when she was seeing that the recording of a vote was not in line with the party directive, she stood up and said, please correct my vote to reflect the directions of the party, not the oath of office, not her conscience, but the directive of the party.
Isn't that what your party expects, though? I mean, as the president of the ATM, Vuyo, if your members in Parliament are going to vote against the party position, are you telling me that you'll never take action against them? Don't you vote collectively as a party?
Look, that is a question that, people are preempting what would happen. But I think for us, let us dwell on what is problematic in that particular vote. Because after the vote transpires, you'll recall that acting SG of the ANC at the time, I think it was the Deputy President Mashatile, actually confirmed that all members of the ANC that voted against the party line, they'll be disciplined. Now, that actually shows that they were violating that Constitutional Court judgment of the UDM. So it is not a matter of what would Party A or Party B do, but the interest here is that when Parliament takes decisions, are they taking decisions, number one, that are rational, and number two, in the spirit of holding the executive accountable, and number three, are those decisions consistent with the previous court rulings that direct or guide members as to when there's a conflict, what do you do?
I suppose the reason I'm asking it is that sometimes as political parties, you've got expectations of other parties, but when it comes to you, you forget that you would act the same way. I'm telling you now, if your MPs tomorrow went and voted against the position that the ATM has taken, you're going to take disciplinary action against them. Otherwise, they're free-flowing, they've got carte blanche to do whatever they want. And that's what's also problematic about our electoral system. What do you think of what's happened in Parliament and the decision to launch this panel investigation and what we saw with who's now the former Speaker of Parliament, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula? There was a suggestion made, I think, by your spokesperson earlier today that Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula is facing the charges she's facing because she dared allow for an investigation into this matter in Parliament. Is that what you believe as the ATM?
No, those are the words of the former Speaker Nqakula. Our view is to say, we need to ensure that Parliament does operate and conduct its business in a manner that is aligned to the Constitution. Rightfully, we will not agree on some issues, but if there's a violation to the Constitution, then we need to approach the courts. We need to seek intervention so that we don't have a Parliament whereby there's abuses of power, because the glaring issue that we find here is that the ANC, because it had majority, it abused its majority to shield its president from being held accountable. This issue happened in 2022. We are sitting now in 2024. And the country is none the wiser on the issues concerning Phala Phala. No one knows exactly how much was there. This guy, Hazim, actually, did he buy those buffaloes, or was he really making jokes when he spoke on Sky News and to say he was really here in the country? And those are the questions that need to be answered by a parliamentary process. And want to reiterate this issue. Parliament cannot delegate its functions to the Hawks or to the Reserve Bank, because the 4 charges that we submitted, some of those charges are only at the purview of Parliament, because the issue of paid work, today something funny happened, because the advocate representing the president is saying, yes, indeed, the president was involved in paid work, but it was not in good faith. Yet on the public protector's report, the president, the public protector there is saying the president was not involved in paid work. So it shows how there's one story for this particular institution, which is a public protector, another separate story for another institution. Now, that is why you've got Parliament that must safeguard its own processes in terms of holding the executive accountable.
And the president is answerable to that Parliament. So you don't believe that the ANC is punishing Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, because your spokesperson, Zaman Chona, indicated so earlier today?
He was just reiterating what she, Mamun Nqakula, was saying. It's not a matter of us picking up something in the air. It was just a matter of he was just repeating what Mamun Nqakula was saying.
So I want to ask you before we wrap up on the Progressive Caucus, because today was a display of what happens when parties come together. Will you work together as the so-called black parties in Parliament like initially planned? Because we've seen that sort of disintegrate. There are some parties that have since left to join the GNU. You see the fight happening or conflict between the the EFF and the MK party. Is there still hope for the unity of all the smaller parties?
Unity is what we need. We can't move the country forward without unity. The past 30 years has clearly shown us that instead of being fragmented as progressive in our country, we need to find a way to unite, to work together. If we're truly serious and intentional and genuine about our intentions of transforming the country and improving the material conditions of our people, there is no other option, there's no other way. There needs to be unity.
Are you happy, though, to lose the identity of your party as the ATM?
There is no party that's going to lose its identity. Currently, we are in the Progressive Caucus. We've got 5 parties there maintaining their different identities. But when matters arise that require us to work together, work together.
The President Jacob Zuma's grand plan is to unite all the parties under one banner and ultimately, from what he says, is then take over the ANC. Seemingly, then all of you are then under the African National Congress, and then you hopefully get enough votes and you get into government. Would you want to be part of that as the ATM? Are you prepared to be part of this amalgamation of parties where you're going to be under one name, whether it's the MK party or it's the ANC?
Look, like I stated, unity is paramount. However, the unity that we're thinking about as the ATM does not really require the dissolution of the different political parties. There's many modalities that we can work on that would maintain the identity of the different political parties, but still find a way to work together. It is currently happening now in the Progressive Caucus, whereby there is no party in the Progressive Caucus that has outright said, we want to dissolve in favor of Party A or Party B, or one party saying, we want you other parties to dissolve and come to us. There is no such discussions. However, when issues come in Parliament, we've got forums whereby we discuss and we agree. And there are issues whereby we don't necessarily agree on everything, because it is human nature as the parties won't agree on anything. But from a principle point of view, all parties in the Progressive Caucus, we are coexisting well in Parliament. Whenever there's a need to work as a one Progressive Caucus bloc, we do that. Whenever there's a need to work in our different formations as a party, we do that. So in answering your questions, there's so many modalities that we can work on to achieve the objective of unity without the dissolution of the different parties.
So you're not going to be swallowed by any other party. The ATM is still going to continue to stand on its own while working with the other parties.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear that. What are you doing anything as one of the parties that are part of the Progressive Caucus in Parliament to sort of mediate between the MK party and the EFF? Because that seems to be diverting attention from what all of you initially planned to do in working together. Are you concerned at all about what's on display now?
Yeah, everyone would be concerned, not even people in the Progressive Caucus, even people who are in the streets, because they want parties to work together. We don't want any case whereby they seemingly we are speaking past each other. We are not really working towards that unity. And the MK and the EFF are 2 big parties which have the leadership, again, that is mature and wise enough to actually sit down and have such conversations. We as a Progressive Caucus, we meet every Tuesday. That is when the Parliament program allows. Could not happen this week and the other week because we had committee weeks whereby we are not in Parliament. And in those meetings, we do address any issue that is seemingly a threat to the unity we are building.
All right. Vuyo Zungula, thank you so much for making time for us. Vuyo Zungula is the president of the ATM. Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. Now, Dr. John Hlophe has penned a memoir examining his life and leadership in Defying the Gallows. He shares his contribution to South Africa's post-apartheid jurisprudence. In 1995, Hlophe became the first black judge appointed to the bench, and 5 years later, he was named the Judge President of the Western Cape High Court. He's known for both his brilliance but also controversies. His fall from the judiciary and rise in politics are connected to former President Jacob Zuma, who made a surprising comeback in this year's elections. Dr. John Hlophe joins us now via video link. Dr. Hlophe, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation, and congratulations on your new book, Defying the Gallows, that you launched last week.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Who was trying to put you through the gallows?
Well, when I was impeached, that to me was an attempt to put me through the gallows, and I defied that because I'm still alive, I'm still standing.
Why do you think they were trying to put you through that, whoever they are? Because I imagine they have their reasons, and obviously there was a process that unfolded which ultimately led to your impeachment. But why do you believe that there are people that wanted you out?
Well, my impeachment has a history, right? The saga lasted for a period of about 16 years. Remember, I was cleared by the Judicial Service Commission on the 29th of September 2009. And there was no new evidence on the basis of which I was convicted. But what happened is that I was cleared by a differently constituted panel. And then after that, there was a lot of litigation and interlopers got involved. That led to a situation whereby the whole process had to start de novo or anew before a differently constituted panel, right? So that I call, that's why I'm saying it was a deliberate attempt to get me off the bench. It was a political decision.
And we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. You have been in the judiciary for a while. You've experienced, the good and the bad, so to speak. But you've also challenged some aspects of the Constitution. What do you think are the weaknesses in our judiciary, in our Constitution? So from when you first joined the judiciary back then in 1995 to where it is now, what is your assessment?
All right. When I was appointed in 1995, the Constitution, at that time, it was the interim Constitution. And of course, in 1996, the Constitution that we have in place now, it came into effect in 1996. My take on the Constitution is there are aspects in our Constitution that one would support. But the main problem that I have personally, and as the MK party, is Section 25 of the Constitution, in terms of which property may not be expropriated without fair and adequate compensation. Our view is to the contrary. You cannot compensate people who own property, but those people did not, those people acquired that property unlawfully and unfairly through the barrel of a gun. So that is our view as the MK party, and that has always been my view. In fact, I started working or publishing on the issue of land way back in 1980. I hope that answers you.
Is the Constitution the problem, or is the problem with the people that are meant to implement that Constitution? Because the Constitution is not self-executing. You still need, that's why we've got politicians, we've got ministers who must be able to give life to that Constitution. And the reason I'm asking that is that the Section 25 of the Constitution that you mentioned, there are certain circumstances under which you can expropriate land without compensation. The problem is the ANC government has failed to exercise that aspect of Section 25 of the Constitution. They have not fully reviewed and exercised it. And every time you speak to them, they say, well, we now realize that what it says. But from my observation, the failure then has been on the government in charge, failing to read the Constitution and finding ways to actually give effect to it, to allow for expropriation without compensation under specific circumstances.
I think you hit the nail on the head. A constitution is a living document to begin with. If the constitution does not serve the will of the people, then it is bad law. But I agree with you to the extent that those who interpret the constitution have not given it the kind of interpretation that we would want to see, particularly when it comes to Section 25 of the Constitution. My views are quite clear. It is possible to interpret Section 25 of the Constitution to mean that property can and should be interpreted without compensation. But that's not the way judges have interpreted Section 25 of the Constitution. So the problem lies in part with the judiciary in terms of how the judiciary has interpreted the Constitution.
But has this been tested already? Has this aspect been tested? Because whenever, and by the way, it says Section 25 of the Constitution as it stands now does, by implication, provide for expropriation without compensation in circumstances where a court could hold that such expropriation for nil value would be just and equitable in the circumstances. When I've interviewed the ANC in the past about these specific circumstances under which land can be expropriated without compensation, they always say, well, we've never really tried to use that aspect to expropriate land. So is it fair to then point to the judiciary and say they are part of the problem because the ANC has never really tried to test this part of the Constitution?
The judiciary is definitely part of the problem. The judiciary, particularly the Constitutional Court, they are the custodian of this Constitution. But I agree with you in respect of the ANC. Remember, it was in 2018, there was a report that was submitted to the National Assembly following a door-to-door campaign where the citizens of this country voted overwhelmingly in favor of expropriation of land without compensation. The ANC-led government at that time did not like the report, and they did not act on the report. The report was basically swept under the carpet, right? It was never acted upon. The ANC itself had passed a resolution in terms of which it supported expropriation of land without compensation, but later on it somersaulted. And the result is that as we stand now, expropriation of land without compensation is not on the agenda. It's not part of their political agenda.
But we agree, though, that the problem then is the party that's in charge and has been in charge, and so much the Constitution. Because if you and I agree that Section 25, under some specific circumstances, can actually allow for the expropriation without compensation, the problem is the failure of the politicians who are in charge, who failed to exercise that part of the Constitution. If we both agree on that, then the politicians are the problem here, not necessarily the Constitution or the courts, because judges don't go to parties and say, you are failing to implement this, or this part of the Constitution doesn't allow for this and that. You have to bring the matter to the courts, and they use the Constitution to analyze and assess whether or not that is possible. So is the problem here not the politicians? Is it fair to point fingers at the judiciary and the Constitution?
I accept that the problem is primarily with the ANC-led government. I've said that. But the judiciary itself, in terms of when it has had the clear opportunity to pronounce on the Constitution, it is very, very clear that they will uphold the principle of expropriation of land, and they would insist on a fair market value. They would insist on compensation. There is no question about that. Why I'm saying this, the Constitution in South Africa has been interpreted in a way which suggests the following. There is what we call the subsidiarity principle. That principle was introduced by the late Chief Justice Charles Kelsey in one of the judgments in the ConCourt. In terms of the subsidiarity principle, a litigant must first go to common law. And if there is no remedy at common law, then you may go to the Constitution. Our approach is totally different. We don't have to go to the common law. We want the Constitution to be amended so that Section 25 is loud and clear. It's loud and clear, and it means there must be expropriation without compensation at all. That is our view.
Yeah. Have you now accepted your impeachment since you have joined politics, or is it something you still have the energy to fight?
Well, I'm challenging my impeachment. It was unlawful, it was unconstitutional. Right now, there are cases that are pending, including a case before the Constitutional Court and the High Court. So I am still challenging my impeachment, but I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing as a politician.
And speak of the work that you're doing, what was the driving force behind your decision to transition to politics? You've said your impeachment was a political decision. Did you join politics to fight back that quote-unquote political decision to impeach you?
Well, absolutely. I felt that I was being unconstitutionally and unlawfully removed from office. It was a political decision, as I have said all along. Remember, just by way of background, the two judges, Justice Jafta and Gabinde, never wanted to complain against me right from the beginning. They were forced to complain. And then eventually that led to my impeachment. And my view is simple. I was impeached for political reasons, and there's only one way to fight politics. You fight politics with politics. So that's why I decided to go to politics.
And how do you plan on fighting it? Because you can't really fight it yourself, especially if you are, let's say, in the JSC, because you'd have to recuse yourself, even if you were on the JSC. How do you want to fight back politically against that political decision?
Well, I'm busy mobilizing against the ANC. We were instrumental as the MK party in breaking the back of the ANC. We were instrumental.
Okay, and then so is that your payback? If the ANC really is affected, even electorally, and is destroyed, would that satisfy you as a payback?
No. In part, yes, it will satisfy me, but obviously there is a broader political agenda. It is to liberate the masses of this country. It is to ensure that Section 25 of the Constitution is repealed and replaced completely by a section which recognizes expropriation of land without compensation. So the battle will not be over until such time that the Constitution has been amended and the provision is made in the Constitution for an expropriation of land without compensation. So it's not just about fighting back. There's more to it. There is a political agenda, which is to liberate the vast majority of the people in this country.
And there's still, and some aspects of it is an agenda to also fight back and revenge.
Well, no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. Remember, I couldn't join the DA. The DA did not want me right from the beginning. The ANC, ironically, I was called by the DA as a deployee of the ANC in the province. So I was once accused by the DA as a deployee of the ANC in the province. So I can't go to the DA. I can't go to the ANC, right? I had to go some. And I went to controversies after controversies was established last year on the 16th of December.
Do you still want to end up sitting on the JSC? Is that the strategy of the MK party? I know the matter is still being challenged in court, but you were the chosen person by the MK party, but also by Parliament, to represent the National Assembly on the JSC. Should you, as the MK party and even as Parliament, win this matter in court, is the strategy to go back and sit on the JSC, or the MK party will think of a different candidate?
I will gladly go back and sit on the JSC and serve my people. I would gladly go back. I believe I can make a contribution. Over the past 25 years or so, as a judge president, I have made a contribution to this country whilst I was serving on the JSC. So I would gladly go back and serve the country.
There are some people that have suggested that you joined politics because bills needed to be paid, especially given that you don't have access to what you thought you would have had access to as a result of your impeachment. Was that your decision? Was your decision strategic like that as well?
I was not motivated by money. I have other options that I could pursue in terms of work and generating an income. Politics, I've always been a politician. I've always loved politics.
Okay. So why the MK party? You are now the deputy president, party leader in parliament. What is it about the party's offering that attracted you?
All right. I've said this on quite a few occasions. I was almost tempted to join economic freedom fighters, right? But what happened was that President Zuma, there was litigation. As a result of litigation, the courts decided that President Zuma could not go back to politics. Then President Zuma looked for someone to lead the MK party. And then he approached me, and it was an offer that I could not resist, because he asked me to join the MK party and lead the party in parliament, and also to become his deputy. So it basically became an offer that I could not resist. And I've always had an interest in politics. And I will tell you, there is also another judge whom I've always regarded as my mentor, Justice Hastings. He was a judge in America, a black judge in the state of Florida. Like me, he was impeached. Guess what he did? He went straight to politics and became a congressman. He was also asked by the state of Florida to serve on the JSC, the Judicial Service Commission.
Yeah.
So it has been done in other countries.
So
and after all, law, after all, will always operate in the context of politics, right? There's a very thin line between law and politics. If you look at great politicians worldwide, I mean, Margaret Thatcher, Robert Mugabe, you may disagree with their policies, but they were lawyers. Their background was in law. Mikhail Gorbachev in Russia, he was a lawyer. So there is no shortage of examples whereby people would start off as lawyers, but eventually they move on to politics.
Yeah. When you say the President Zuma wanted you to lead the organization because of the legal limitations for him to do so, one would argue that, well, you are now in the party, but he's still leading the organization. Yes, you play a role as his deputy, but he's still the leader of the party. And in fact, when you look at the constitution of the MK, there's a lot of power that's concentrated in his office. He takes a lot of decisions, yes, we're told in consultation with some of the top officials, but so much power is concentrated in his party. So when do we start seeing then Dr. John Hlophe come in and become a leader that Jacob Zuma has asked to be?
Well, I'm leading the MK party in parliament. And remember, I'm also the leader of the opposition party, because MK party has a status of an official opposition party.
Yeah.
I'm quite content with my role in parliament. Outside of parliament, I'm the deputy to President Zuma. It is obviously up to President Zuma to decide how much powers he wishes to delegate to me or to anybody else.
Yeah.
He still has powers, he's still fresh, and we derive a lot of inspiration from President Zuma. I have no problems with him retaining the powers that he has. After all, he started the party. I didn't join in controversies to come and compete with President Zuma. I respect him as an elderly statesman. There's a lot that I have learned from him. I admire his style of politics, but I have a different style here and there. So I'm very content with the role that I'm playing in parliament as a leader of the opposition party, but similarly, I'm content with the role that I'm playing outside of parliament as a deputy to President Zuma.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah. What do you like about his style of politics?
His style of politics is down to earth. He's a charmer. We all know he did not go to school very far, but he's a people's person. I like that about him. Also, don't forget the contribution that President Zuma made during 9 years when he was in office. You remember there were universities that never existed in this country before. They were built by President Zuma. There was no university in Mpumalanga, for example. There was no university in the Northern Cape. They were built by President Zuma. President Zuma put a lot of money in education, far more than the budget that we have today. Also, he helped immensely in terms of rolling out the anti-retroviral IRBs. He did a lot in that regard. So those are some of the good things. I'm mentioning quite a few things that President Zuma did that nobody can dispute. The evidence is there. And quite frankly, some of those gains that were made under President Zuma, we are beginning to see a lot of them being vanishing now.
I quickly want to ask you before we wrap about, as a leader of the opposition in Parliament, you've indicated in the past that both the EFF and the MK party are Africanists. So the plan was to work together even in Parliament as the Progressive Caucus. But you have seen what's happened lately with some senior EFF leaders leaving the party to join your party, the MKP. The leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, describes that as a betrayal. In fact, he says they have no business working with the MK party as part of President Zuma's unity project. Where does that leave the need for the alliance of the black parties?
The alliance is still there in Parliament. We meet every Tuesday. The Progressive Caucus would meet every Tuesday, and we work together in Parliament. I can understand where Comrade Julius is coming from. He feels betrayed. I can understand where he's coming from. But I think what is important for us is black unity at the end of the day. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, we are not there to swallow the EFF alive. That's not our policy. We canvass openly. We try and get voters who have not voted for us. We don't target senior leaders within the EFF. Definitely, I have never done that and will never do that. I'm speaking for myself, and I have no doubt I'm speaking for senior colleagues in the party as well.
Yeah. So what is because I'm talking about the unity project also outside of Parliament, because President Jacob Zuma says that's his goal. He says he wants to unite all these parties. He wants them to come together. And then he says he wants to ultimately take over the African National Congress as well. So what I'm asking is, Julius Malema says, yes, they're in Parliament, you can work together, but he says that's where it ends. He doesn't want to be, his party is not going to be part of some unity projects led by President Jacob Zuma. In fact, his argument is that the president was president for so long, why he has failed to unite the black parties for so many years, even when he was in the ANC. How is he going to be able to do it now? What is the plan around this unity project? I mean, when President Jacob Zuma says, ultimately I want to take over the ANC, where does that leave the MK party? Will you be in the ANC when he takes over the ANC? Is he going to be president of both the parties? What does it look like?
Black unity is very important for black people, and is very important for a pan-Africanist organization like the MK party and the EFF. It is unfortunate that there is this tension at the moment between CIC Malema and President Zuma. But I hope we will be able to bury the differences and be in a position to work together amicably. As we are working together in Parliament, there is no reason why we should not be working together outside Parliament. We've got to put our differences aside and focus on the job of the day, which is to liberate the black masses of this country. That, for me, is far more important than the differences that we have.
What about the plan, though, by President Zuma to take over the ANC? Where does that leave the MK party?
The MK party will survive, there is no doubt, even way beyond President Zuma. That I must make it clear. I have made it clear before. The plan to take over the ANC, that was part of the plan when the MK party was formed by President Zuma. And now there have been obviously some changes here and there in terms of the political landscape. President Zuma himself is no longer a member of the ANC. But the plan for me is black unity, right? With or without the ANC.
Okay.
It's black unity that is far important for me.
Dr. John Hlophe, thank you so much for joining us on Face the Nation tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, here's a question that we've been asking you tonight on Face the Nation. What do you think of what happened in the Constitutional Court today regarding the Phala Phala matter? Should the matter be referred back to Parliament? Or are you thinking that, well, the ship has sailed, let bygones be bygones? Vuyani on Twitter says, Clement, our constitutional democracy gives judges, justices such unfettered powers, even when their stance on matters that are questionable. I think the matter should be dealt with correctly to protect the integrity of the president's office. Bono says this matter must be thrown away. The ATM and EFF are playing politics and using ConCourt to pursue their own agenda against the president. The NPA decided against proceeding with this matter. Due processes were followed by Parliament. What more do they want? Mzufukile says, I like what is being done by the ATM and the EFF, unlike the DA who were tabling many motions of no confidence during President Zuma's administration, but the DA is doing differently during President Ramaphosa. Mlungisi says the matter must go back to GNU and must be a secret ballot. Thank you so much for the tweets that have come through. We've also received some of your WhatsApp voice notes. So let's just wrap with a few of them before we wrap up the show today.
Good evening, Clemens. My name is Kolani Puka from Kabeja. The ATM and the EFF are just abusing the processes because we've got three spheres of government where judiciary is independent, parliament is independent, and the parliament have taken a decision. The committee which was supposed to look at this matter of Phala Phala was found wanting. They must just leave this thing and we continue making sure that the country is succeeding. They are now pick and choosing as Advocate Tobeka Ngukaitobi have put it during the course of the day in front of the justices of the Constitutional Court. Thank you very much.
Sam Alekotrikopis Clement Dumela. If Phala Phala saga is referred to Parliament, then we better forget. All the GNU parties are going to practice the principle of scratch my back and I will scratch yours. DA, Inkatha, UDM and others are going to vote with ANC because they cannot bite the hand which gives them food. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on Twitter and on the WhatsApp line. And thanks for watching the Tuesday edition of Face the Nation. We'll be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Have a good night. Cheers.